Healthy, vibrant plants in your terrarium is what brings your bioactive setup to life. They add color, texture, vibrance, and are the key in turning a regular setup into an epic, bioactive, self-containing terrarium. Today, I will share my tips to help you achieve just that.
Howdy. Welcome to Terrarium Plants 101. Today, we're going to discuss everything you need to know to get you started when you're planting your very own bioactive terrarium. If you're anything like me, when I first started, you're probably pretty overwhelmed right now, and I get it. There is a lot of info out there, a lot of conflicting info out there, and there's a lot of questions that you probably have. Let me know if any of these questions sound familiar. Which plants are or aren't toxic to my animal? What kind of lighting do I need? How big will these plants grow? What kind of maintenance do these plants require? Do I need to get any fertilizer for these plants? What kind of substrate do these plants require? What kind of color patterns will these plants have when they're fully grown? Will they outcompete each other? Which plants work best with which other plants? Some other things to consider is what kind of texture do the plants have? You don't want to just go for color. Personally, I like there to be different textures as well as colors when it's concerning my plant. Do my plants require ventilation? What kind of maintenance do my plants have to have? So we're gonna get into this. First things first, I think we should start from the bottom up, and that is with substrate.
Okay, I might have lied just a little bit and got ahead of myself. Actually, you start from the bottom with a false bottom. This can be easily achieved with some aquarium divider grid and aquarium filter foam. The idea is you want to keep it lightweight, and you want to make sure that this separates your water line or drainage layer from your actual substrate. I'll make sure to link everything that I used in the description to make it easier to find, and if you want more detail, check out my vampire or poison dart frog terrarium guides.
You do want to make sure that before you start anything, you want to know what kind of animal you're going to be putting in your terrarium, if any. But that is your baseline. If you, for example, are going to get a poison dart frog, which is what I have in my terrariums here, you're going to want to research what plants specifically are poisonous to poison dart frogs. I know that sounds kind of funny. One of the most important things that you can do when building your terrarium is making sure that you have a drainage layer. These plants are going to require watering, and you want that water to seep to the bottom and be separated by about an inch or two from your actual substrate. This is super important because if you keep that substrate wet, it will eventually rot and it'll make it smell terrible. A good mix of different materials to make up a good substrate that can easily drain water consists of tree fern, pine bark, sphagnum moss, as well as some horticultural charcoal. I'll try to link as much of these things in the description as I can. Another thing that you want to consider is leaf litter. Now, the reason that I say this is because it will slowly release natural fertilizer into your substrate and help your plants grow.
Here are some good products to use when you're concocting up your substrate. Front and center is one of my favorite products, the ADA Aqua Soil. Technically, this is a product for planting aquariums, but it works equally well in terrariums. Believe it or not, this is the only bag that I've ever purchased because you don't really need that much of it. The building block for every plant is carbon, and a great source of carbon is through horticultural charcoal, which I highly recommend you add to your mix. While we're on the subject of carbon, another great product to use is aquarium activated carbon. I would suggest adding it into your water line as it helps to draw toxins from the water in your false bottom. Most terrarium plants require high humidity and moisture levels, and a great way to retain moisture is by adding some sphagnum moss. I also pair this with cocoa peat, and that's actually what makes up the backdrop in most of my terrariums. All this can get pretty expensive, but luckily, you really don't need to purchase this often. Leaf litter is one of those products that you definitely do not want to sleep on. Now, you might be tempted to pick this up off the ground outside, as there's tons of leaves everywhere, but let me tell you why this is a terrible idea. You never want to introduce outside materials that could contain pesticides or actual pests themselves.
As far as lighting goes, simple grow lights will usually suffice. I'm gonna link a few of the ones that I've used in my tanks in the description for reference, but you really don't have to overthink it too much. You will more wanna make sure that the plants you place in your tank are getting the adequate lighting from where they're at in the tank. So and that makes sense. You're looking at positioning. So let's talk about some of the different types of terrarium, vivarium plants, etc. I've broken it down into a few main categories. Let's say instead of a terrarium, you're building a paludarium, meaning that you have a water section. You want to try to find some semi-aquatic plants that you can put into that transition area between land and water. And I've got some good suggestions for that.
Now that we know what substrate to use, and we know a little bit about false bottoms, let's dive into some of my terrariums and look at some of the different species of plants and how they all work together. We'll start with the semi-aquatic in my vampire crab terrarium. One of my all-time favorites, the Pogostemon helferi, is an awesome plant. Semi-aquatic that can be grown underwater, halfway submerged, or even just above the waterline if the environment is humid enough. It has a decent grow rate, but doesn't grow too tall, and makes a great nursery, in this case for my baby cherry shrimp. However, my vampire crabs also seem to love it. Since it thrives in the high humidity, you can also grow it inside of a closed terrarium environment. Here you can see it producing oxygen for my orange springtail colony that I use to seed my other terrariums. It's a beautiful plant with an amazing texture, but more importantly, it's super easy to grow, making it the ideal beginner plant.
Another great plant to use, and something that I feature heavily in my tank behind me, is different vining or creeping plants that will cover your background and also give your frogs somewhere to jump to if that's the animal that you choose to use.
Let's dive into my volcano paludarium and explore some of the creeping and vining plants featured in this tank. There's no better time to talk about the creeping fig, which is a great background plant that will cover the backdrop for you nicely. But one thing to consider is that this does grow pretty quickly and requires quite a bit of maintenance. Here you can see just how extensive it is to clear out the creeping fig. I have to stay on top of trimming it back regularly, especially since my blushing philodendron, which is one of my frog's favorite plants to hide in, would get overgrown and suffocated out. That brings me to this other vining plant that I introduced to my tank, coming from a poison dart frog delivery. I'm not really sure what it is though. I'm not gonna lie, it was extremely successful in my vivarium, maybe a little too successful, and I had to spend tons of time trimming it back out because it made my terrarium look like a jungle mess. Since this tank is so heavily populated with vining plants, the maintenance is a little higher than usual, and here you can get an idea of just how much of it I pulled out of there. This was about a month worth of growth. I did, however, leave my velvet philodendron. This is one of my favorite terrarium vining plants for obvious reasons. The more juvenile leaves have a yellow color starting out, but eventually they grow to a darker green and have a velvety look to them, hence the name. They also have a very cool heart shape to them, which I really like. A very common plant found in many terrariums is the golden pothos, which, for obvious reasons, since it's a stunning plant.
There are also broadleaf plants which can take up quite a lot of space in your terrarium.
But that can really work in your favor since you'll only need a couple of them to really make a terrarium pop, like my other poison dart frog terrarium here, which features the Hoffmania, my by far favorite terrarium plant for obvious reasons. It's got a metallic look on top and a reddish orange hue underneath and stalk. Not even going to try to pronunciate that one, but it's another one of those super cool plants, especially because of the unique texture it has on top. I get most of my plants from frogdaddy.com, which is also where I got this amazing product, the wet moss mix. You must simply apply it to your backdrop and make sure that it stays well watered by spraying and misting it down. You'll especially have success with it if you apply it to cork bark or onto a mixture of cocoa peat and sphagnum moss. I especially like the wet moss mix because of the great variety of mosses and microferns that it grow all on its own. Here you can see just how vibrant it made my vampire crab, paludarium. Last but not least, let's talk about bromeliads. These are an arid type plant, which can really make your terrarium get that Jurassic feeling to it. If you're planning on getting poison dart frogs, a bromeliad is a must-have. It's how the poison dart frogs actually reproduce. They lay their eggs and then deposit their tadpoles in the center, which holds water. You can almost think of the bromeliad as a poison dart frog condo or apartment complex. I always find them in there.
Hopefully this video helped shed some knowledge and answered some of the questions or concerns you had about terrarium plants. I know we only scratched the surface, but this is just Terrarium Plants 101. I wanted to help you make sure that you didn't make too many beginner mistakes. Quick reminder, I'm going to link as much of this information in the description. Please do like and subscribe for more info, and I've got plenty more videos coming out soon. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed.